Hey guys, welcome to the Weight Loss by Pete podcast. I'm Pete Weintraub, permanent weight loss specialist. You're either watching this live here on YouTube or you're listening to this in my podcast on one of either iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. Today we're going to talk about whether or not cholesterol levels matter, and more specifically, whether or not they matter to your health. The reason that I'm going into this is because just prior to Christmas, I had my blood taken, and I just got the results back today. I'm going to share them with you here if you're watching. If you're listening, don't worry. I'm going to go over what came back. There are three things that were above the normal range. Everything else came back perfect. The first thing and the most important thing that came back high was my total cholesterol levels, all right? So the normal range, for those of you who don't know, is between 100 to 199 milligrams per deciliter. I came in at 202. And then my LDL cholesterol, which is considered the quote-unquote bad cholesterol, came back high at 125. And the reference range for that, and the normal range, is between 0 to 99 milligrams per deciliter. So I want to go over today. The third thing was about something that, if you have a high level, can prevent you from, can lead you to having liver cancer and other terrible conditions, which I was low there. I wasn't high. And therefore, if you're low there, it's not a big deal. I confirmed that with my doctor as well as through my own research. So that's not worth discussing. But we're going to discuss this because I remember the last time I had a general physician who was not my friend, who in the last year became my general physician, he would always come back to me because I've been eating a high-fat, moderate-protein, low-carb diet. I call it the lipolytic diet for the last few years. So I've been doing it for about a year when I last got my blood done with him. And when he had me come in to review my results, he told me everything was perfect. Aside from your cholesterol levels are high. The reason that I quote unquote fired that doctor was because I then asked him, because I had done my research and I was educated on the subject and I understood. I said, well, what cholesterol is high? And he said, well, it's your total cholesterol. And I was like, okay, so is my HDL and my LDL high? And the good cholesterol, quote unquote, is your HDL. Your bad cholesterol is LDL. I said, well, it's your HDL that's high. And I said, okay, so then what's the big deal? And he's like, well, like he didn't have an answer for me. And this guy, he was a general physician as well as a cardiologist. He practiced cardiology. In fact, so I was like, all right, I'm done with this guy. Like, if I can outsmart a guy who's gone through years of medical training and a residency and has had his own very lucrative, successful practice for a number of years, then that's not a good sign. So I kind of went AWOL. I hadn't got my bloods done in a couple of years. Figured since autoimmune disease, heart disease, and all these different fun things run in my family, I figure doing my blood every 1 or 2 years is a good thing to do. So my friend who just became a physician, I asked him if I could get a prescription. He said yes. I went to a local LabCorp and I just got the results back today. So like I just shared with you, my total cholesterol and my LDL was high. So LDL is considered the bad cholesterol. And it can be bad. And let me explain. So there's actually two types of LDL cholesterol. And first off, LDL, HDL, those aren't cholesterol. Those are actually lipoproteins in your blood, one of which has been linked to potentially putting you at a higher risk for developing cardiovascular disease. And that's LDL. Now, like I said, there's two forms. There's the type that you get when you eat a high saturated fat diet like I do, and they're large, fluffy, and they're not harmful. They're just large, fluffy, and in your blood. And when you get routine blood work like this was, your LDL particles can come back high, even though technically you're not unsafe. So that's what I believe is going on there. And again, my levels were pretty high there, but because of what I eat and how I eat, I wasn't really surprised. Then the type that is harmful, there's a smaller, denser type of LDL particle. And that's the type that can constrict your arteries and increase your chances of a cardiovascular incident. So if I really wanted to be thorough, I could get a blood test called an NMR lipoprofile. And basically what that will do is it will actually measure, I'll have to take more blood, but it will measure the LDL particles in my blood, and it will show the large, fluffy, non-harmful particles versus the small, dense, harmful particles. So I'm not going to do that because, again, I don't believe that the LDL in my blood is actually negatively impacted. I exercise regularly. I eat a very clean, very good diet a vast majority of the time. So I am convinced that I don't have to take those measures, especially since I'd have to pay out of pocket for that test. Not something I really want to do. So there's that. So if you have high LDL, don't freak out. If you eat a lot of saturated fat, you eat a lot of meat, butter, cheese, things like that, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. All right. Now, there are fats that are harmful to you that can hinder you and can create these small, dense LDL particles that can constrict your arteries and leave you susceptible. And those are omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. Those are most commonly found in things like margarine and several forms of vegetable oil. And a lot of restaurants still cook with soybean oil, sunflower oil, things like that. These are things that, when oxidized or when heated beyond a certain point, can form trans fat. And that can really do your body a ton of damage. It can lead to cancer. It can obviously lead to heart disease because it will constrict your arteries, and it can lead to obesity, type 2 diabetes, a whole range of stuff. But in fact, let me pull up this study for you if you're watching. If you're not, I'm going to read to you the synopsis. Give me 1 second here. I'm trying to find the appropriate thing. So I'm going to go in here. Desktop. Here we are. All right. So I'm going to go here to this study in the BMJ. And BMJ is a medical journal. And the conclusion of a study here, I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's terrible to read these things, but the conclusion is that saturated fats, I have it highlighted in case you're watching, are not associated with all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, CHD, ischemic stroke, or type 2 diabetes. But the evidence is heterogeneous with methodological limitations. Trans fats are associated with all-cause mortality, total CHD and CHD mortality, probably because of higher levels of intake of industrial trans fats than ruminant trans fats. Dietary guidelines must carefully consider the health effects of recommendations for alternative macronutrients to replace trans fats and saturated fats. All right, so basically what this is saying here is that saturated fat is not the enemy. So if you're a doctor, or if you've learned in health class growing up, or you've done your own research and you've seen you have to cut back on red meat, you have to cut back on butter and cheese and all these different things, you don't have to do that. In fact, it would be stupid of you to do that unless you have some form of allergy to those foods. Like, for example, I'm allergic to dairy, so I don't eat cheese or butter very often. But I do eat a lot of red meat. I had sausage for lunch. I'm probably going to have ground beef stir fry that I like to make for dinner. And guess what? Again, my bloods came back great. The only thing that was high was my LDL, my total cholesterol. And here's the thing about total cholesterol. Total cholesterol is simply adding up your HDL, your good, and your LDL. And that's all total cholesterol is. So like I said in my example from a few years back, when my HDL was high, my LDL was low. And again, I'd only been eating this lipolytic diet for about a year at that point. So not too much had changed in my blood. He thought that it was a bad thing, even though, even according to his standards and the standards of much of the health and medical community, I was in bad shape. Whereas now, he'd probably yell at me if he was talking to me and say, look, not only is your total cholesterol high, your LDL is high. This is bad. You got to stop eating red meat, blah, blah, blah. And no, I'm not going to stop doing that. In fact, red meat is more nutritious than poultry and things like that. You know, fish is up there as well in terms of something that's healthy in terms of a meat source. So I'm not going to stop eating that because A, it fills me up. B, it's more nutritious. And C, you just feel better after eating it. I don't often feel satiated and really healthy and good after I eat poultry. I tend to just, going by feel now, I tend to feel better after I eat red meat. Like, think about going to a steakhouse and biting into a delicious steak. It tastes great, and you're like, oh my God, this is like exactly what I needed. Whereas with chicken, you're like, yeah, it's all right, not a big deal. there's a reason for that. It's because red meat has a lot better nutrients. And I know if you're vegetarian or vegan, it's terrible. If you watched any of these videos about what happens, especially in conventional practices and farming, where how these animals are raised and then slaughtered, it is terrible. And then luckily they're working. I'm mostly against genetically modified stuff, but they are working right now on using stem cells from cows and pigs and different forms of different animals that we use as meat sources and growing ground beef and things of that nature in a lab. And if it checks out, it's the same nutrient profile, and there's nothing bad in it, it doesn't have a difference, then that might be a viable alternative to having to slaughter all the different animals that we do every year from an ethical perspective. But getting back, total cholesterol doesn't matter. In fact, there's a study here. Let me see if I have it. I don't have it up here, but there was a study done recently. Actually, let me see if I can pull it up. Give me 1 second here. It wasn't that long ago that I had it. Bear with me 1 second, guys. I'm sorry. I should have been prepared with that. All right, I can't find it. I'm not going to waste your time on that. But basically, studies have come out in recent years showing that for every 30 points your cholesterol drops, your chances of having a cardiovascular incident are 22% higher for every 30 points dropped. So if you have low cholesterol, your chances of having a cardiovascular incident are very high. And to use a perfect example, my dad has heart disease, and he's had a couple of heart attacks. He's had 8 stents put in, through 2 procedures over the years. He's on statins and blood thinners and all that stuff. And he has low cholesterol. He's always had low cholesterol. Whereas I'm very interested to see, as I age, I'm sure my cholesterol is going to get higher because I'm going to continue to eat this lipolytic, high-fat diet. And there's a good chance that my cholesterol levels will rise gradually. And there's this cool infographic that I do have up for you here that I want to show you. So let me just pull that up. All right. And I'm going to read it to you guys if you're listening, so don't worry. Sorry to be so back and forth. So here's an infographic from Mercola.com. By the way, that's great, and this is unsolicited. I've never spoken to Dr. Mercola. He does great work on a number of subjects, and how to make sense of your cholesterol levels. This is a great resource. And you see here, if you're watching, if you're not listening, there's a section of this infographic that says, what are better indicators of heart disease? So how low is low cholesterol? There's this little tiny picture here on the right-hand side. At least 200 milligrams per deciliter, so that's considered high, is an optimum level. Under 150 milligrams per deciliter is too low. And there have been a ton of studies over the years that have proven this, that have verified this, that folks who had lower cholesterol levels, especially under 150, were at a very much increased risk of having a cardiovascular incident as opposed to someone who had high cholesterol, especially as they age. So the older you are, the higher cholesterol you have, the much lower the chance you have of having a heart-related incident. I hope you guys found this helpful, and I hope it opens your eyes. Usually I talk about weight loss, obviously stuff that's healthy in relation to weight loss, but here too, if you want to lose weight in a healthy, sustainable way, you have to eat a lipolytic diet. You got to get your fat burn, and calorie counting and portion control is only going to get you so far. I know studies have come out recently dispelling the starvation mode theory, in that after you restrict your calories or portions for too long, your body goes into a starvation mode and holds on to everything, good, bad, or indifferent, and stores it as fat. I can promise you, as someone who's personally lost 100 pounds and who went through a 3-year, not 3 weeks, not 3 months, 3-year plateau, I can honestly tell you that the starvation mode does happen. Because when I started, I didn't have any of my personal training or nutrition certifications. I just ate less and I exercised more. I lost 40 pounds in the first 4 months, but then I was stuck for 3 years. And no matter how much I restricted my calories and how much I increased my time in the gym and being active, I could not lose a pound, change my body composition, or do anything beneficial to save my life. So what I ended up doing was I decided to change my perspective after 3 years of blindly following this crap and trying to say, okay, maybe if I add this and take this out of my diet, but still counting calories and watching my portions. And when I changed to worrying more so about food quality instead of food quantity, the floodgates open. And I learned about the ketogenic diet, which was great. I followed that for 6 months and I got into the best shape of my life. I got to my shredded state, which you can see in my transformation videos. And it was amazing. And while ketogenic is very hard to follow as a lifestyle, it really is 25 net carbs or fewer per day. Even though you do get used to it after a week or two, it is very tough to hold up in the real world. You can still eat a lipolytic diet where you really regulate your carb intake. You're eating copious amounts of fat or moderate amount of protein, and you're going to be much better off. But long story short, guys, don't worry about raising your cholesterol levels. Again, what they're measuring is not cholesterol. They're lipoproteins in your blood. And while, yes, LDL or certain LDL particles can constrict your arteries, that is true. The chances of that happening if you're eating a diet high in saturated fat like the one I recommend is slim to none. So if you're eating a diet high in saturated fat, if you're feeling and looking better, and the only quote unquote negative coming back is that you got your blood work done and your total cholesterol and your LDL is high, don't even worry about it. Because like I said, studies have come out to show that saturated fat is not going to lead you to a cardiovascular incident. In fact, it's the omega-6 polyunsaturated fats, vegetable oils, and margarine, shit like that, that much of the medical community recommends, that I've seen since my dad had a procedure done last fall, them giving him in a cardiovascular wing in a hospital the day after he had stents put in. Ridiculous. But anyway, that stuff, when it's either oxidized or heated during the processing of the food that it's being used in, can convert to trans fat, and that is what creates these harmful LDL particles and thus constricts your arteries and enhances your chances of developing heart disease. So guys, don't fall in for any of this bullshit. A lot of these people have no idea what they're talking about, and just by doing a few simple Google searches, you can look at the literature yourself and see for yourself. There have been news articles and studies coming out more and more so in recent years. There are books. There, The Big Fat Truth, I believe it's called, by Nina Teicholz. Gary Taubes has written several books. The Case Against Sugar, the most common one. Dr. Mercola wrote one, Fat for Fuel. All of these are great books. All these are great sources. And just by doing a little due diligence, you can't just blindly accept what your doctors and what the medical community tells you. In my opinion, at this point, I think a lot of the research is coming out showing that what we believe for the last 60 years has been foolhardy. It was financed by the sugar, the grain, corn industries when they were seeing the preliminary research from even back then showing a correlation between enhanced ingestion of their foods and heart disease. And so they want to spin it, enhance the selling of their foods at the detriment to dietary fat. And as a result, over the last 60 years, America and much of the civilized world who's followed these dietary guidelines has gotten fatter and sicker. And they're too proud or maybe even too scared to admit that for more than half a century, they've misled us. But you know what? The tide needs to turn. We need to take responsibility for ourselves and start to make differences. So I hope you found this helpful. If you like this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel by clicking the subscribe button below here on YouTube. If you're listening on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher, there should be an easy way to subscribe to my channel. And last thing, in the description below, I'm going to give you a free gift. It's a report. It details the 5 strategies I personally use to lose 100 pounds and keep them off. They're the same 5 strategies that I teach my permanent weight loss clients, and they're the basis to losing weight in a healthy, sustainable, and permanent way. Just go to the link right there, enter your name and email address so I know where to send it, and I'll get it over to you. And I thank you again for watching. Again, my name is Pete Weintraub. I'm a permanent weight loss specialist. Thanks again for listening or watching. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Have a good one.